And our next question comes from the line of Larry Beagelson from Wells Fargo. Your question, please.
Thanks for congrats on a great quarter. Excuse me. Thanks for taking the question. Just two for me. One on the U.S., one on margins. How are you, Dave or Jamie? How are you thinking about utilization in the U.S. going forward as da Vinci 5 becomes a higher percent of the install base? Could we continue to see it trend higher? And net placements have been down recently year over year. I think that's primarily because of a tough comp last year. But how do you think about that metric? Investors have been, or some investors are focused on it. And I had one follow-up.
Yeah, I'm going to maybe zoom out for a second, Larry, and recognize the discussion on net placements that's been occurring. In terms of our approach, we're first focused on aligning with customers in ways where they need extra capacity for da Vinci because it brings patient benefit, patient value. And so we actually look first and foremost at procedure growth as our primary.
Right, there you go. Procedure growth. It's the KPI. Anyone who's out there doing a robot, procedure growth, utilization, expanded procedures. This is all that's going to count. They know it. Everyone knows it. The install base is important. It's a third of their business, but that's not where the growth is, nor where the future is. It's all in the utilization.
Metric of success, because obviously that reflects adoption and use of our technology for patients. And so therefore we take a customer by customer approach in terms of how we engage with them on the capital side. And we're as happy to help them expand their install base as a way to increase capacity as we are to do an upgrade, give them da Vinci 5, particularly in the context of what we see are opportunities to have efficiency benefits in da Vinci 5 that in effect also create a capacity expansion opportunity. And so you see that reflected in Q3 results now that we're in broad launch and that you have 900 plus systems in the field. And we think that whichever way we go, as long as it's in alignment with the customer, it's healthy for them and for us. And I think that's well illustrated.
So don't get fixated on the amount of installs. It's making sure that every install, and the more you do, the better, is utilized and has a lot of utilization. And they understand that that's where the profit comes. A underutilized robot in a hospital will cost you as the company money, will cost the customer money, and eventually will either slow down or come back. So it's all about utilization.
In Q3 results. Now, in terms of the question, what will long-term US utilization growth be? I think we're focused more at the segments of customers than the US average, because I do think, as we've talked about in the past, there are likely some mixed dynamics, particularly as we look to capture benign procedures that are in community and rural hospitals that are going to have smaller programs.
Okay, again, I think this is important. You can't just put this as a big homologous blob. You have to look at, so if you're a massive major hospital and you've got, you do 10,000 procedures a year across surgery, and you're a small regional hospital that does 3,000 procedures a year, then of course there's a ratio basis of what will be done from the robot. So you've got to be careful how you tease these numbers out and how those percentage growths look year on year as well. It's really important that you understand the customer segmentation you're in, and it's what I would be caring about as a metric is not that, yes, the growth would be important, but my metric would be, if I have a hospital that can do 300 procedures, how many of those 300 procedures do I get? So it would be my percentage utility or the percentage use of the system within the bubble that I can do it in. And if a hospital is 100 and they do 90, is that better than a hospital with 300 that does 120? Which one's better from a utilization point of view? And that's what you've got to start thinking about as you go forward.
But think of larger institutions with a larger number of procedures utilizing DV5. We'd expect them to be able to drive improvements to utilization. Where that nets out to, I think we'll see, because it's so early with respect to the DV5 launch.
That's super helpful. Jamie, on margins, excuse me, it looks like the implied gross margin in Q4 at the midpoint of the guidance range is slightly below 67%. So my question's on next year. Just what are some of the puts and takes to consider? Is that kind of
Okay, I wanted to take this bit as well. So Intuitive, after 25 years with all these different platforms and doing millions and millions of instruments every year, are looking at 67% margin, right? So this is not 80%, 90%, which is on a lot of disposables. You have to look at the blended across the whole the whole thing of the capital, the service, the consumables, the reusables. I cannot stress enough to the companies out there that if you are going out with an aggressive thing that you think within the first 3 years you're going to make any money on these robots, forget it. I mean, they're at 67% after 25 years. If you go back and look through their history of just, how much, where their margins were early on, it's horrendous. But it's fine. But this is, you're talking 10 years to 20 years that you have to look at. And even at 20 years out, you're going to still be looking at around 60% margins at best. This is world class at 67. This is world class with the biggest volumes at 67. If you've got about 15% of market share, your margins are going to be worse. I think you're going to be looking at 60 or 50%, 10 years in. I think 3 years in, you're still underwater. I think 5 years in, you start to get to break even. I think from that, you start getting a little bit of margin, but take it from the best. They're 67%. That it should be a notification to everybody. There's this gold rush of so many companies going out there. A lot of them won't survive because the margins are just not going to be there. Sorry.
a Q4 number a good starting point for next year for the gross margin, or are there additional headwinds or tailwinds to consider? And any directional color on the impact of going direct in those three markets you called out? Net positive, negative, or just anything directional? Thank you.
Yep, I understand the question on gross margins for 26. Larry, we're going to wait till January to provide color on what the outlook is there. With respect to going direct in Italy, Spain, Portugal, we continue to expect that to be slightly accretive to pro forma EPS upon going direct. And that's really a function of...
Big news for those that missed it. So two of the biggest distributors and the best distributors for Intuitive in the world were in Italy and Spain. It was the sort of AB Medica and Abex. And they've now decided to take that business direct there, which I think will be good because it will help them with pricing in those markets. They'll be able to have a much more reasonable actual selling price or end user selling price by doing that, but there is cost of that. But I think what happens is ultimately they get more profit in there because they're going direct. And I do believe that every distributor, so Stratner down in Brazil will eventually be direct. And I think that Device Technologies in Australia, and I don't know if any of that's ever been announced, but if you look, they've systematically gone through the distributors, and it just helps them from a margin point of view. Generally, initial hit, taking the people on and stuff, but generally, I think it makes it just much better for them from a margin point of view, but also from a control point of view of messaging, for pricing, all kinds of things. There's a lot of benefit to it. So that's what they're talking about with this. We're going direct in Italy, Spain, and Portugal.
You eliminate the margin of the distributor, and that gets partially offset by the team that we take on, the transfers from them to us.
All right. Thanks so much, Jamie.
Thank you. And our next question comes from the line of Rick Wise from Stifel. Your question, please.
Talk about what inning are we here in the hub story, the hub evolution, the potential, to enhance DaVinci 5 performance, users, just any color and direction you could give us would be.
Quick one for everyone. This is where we talk about the tower and the hub, which is the centralization part of either tower stroke hub, where it's going to be a communication center for video, for telesurgery, telepresence, all of those things. So that's what we're talking
Great.
about here.
Thank you so much.
Sure. Let me take that question. And so, I might just reframe it a bit from hub, but just to kind of the digital foundation of DaVinci 5 that we've talked about. When we launched the system, we were talking about its 10,000 times increased compute power. And the hub is a part of that story. So we now have the integrated hub hardware that is foundational to collecting some of the video data and getting it processed by Intuitive and then returned back to customers through case insights, and kind of said simply. And so
basically, they take in the video, they chop it up, they put it with all of the kinematic data, they find some insights, and they pump it back to the users, for those that don't know, either through an app or through a web-based, and to give insights on the cases for the hospitals, for the surgeons. You can go and see, there's a lot of videos online about their case insights.
This digital promise, if you will, of how it's going to impact surgery, through Da Vinci 5 and more, you have to remember it has layers. It's going to be a progressive kind of growth over time, and it starts with really good data. And we talked about that before. So different sources of data, one of which is video data, and that's where Hub is integral in collecting that video data.
You have to combine all
and
this
getting
data.
it to intuitive, so it can be segmented and have other measures and analyses performed. And there are all sorts of other kind of data, including kinematic data and force data, electronic medical record data for certain customers when we have an agreement signed. So you take those data, and then you can start analyzing the data using these powerful tools that we have increasingly available to us with AI and machine learning, and you start drawing meaningful insights from those data. And so that's that progression, ultimately leading, we think, to augmented dexterity or intraoperative guidance.
I did a whole blog on this the other day about this, so go and watch it. I won't do it now, but it's basically allowing you to almost have help as you're going through. And this is a dangerous part of the procedure. The suturing here is going to be had, and you're going to get all of this augmentation. And a big piece of that is taking the video data and combining it with everything, so that the models can learn, and the AI and the machine learning can learn from video, force feedback, kinematic, which is the movement data of the hands, the movement data of the arms.
To really bring to life, how do we help surgeons and care teams make better decisions, different decisions to optimize outcomes, economics, or other measures of surgery. And so that is that progression. And Hub, your question specifically, is really an important part of that because of its integration around video. But overall, we're excited about this area and what it can mean to progress in the quintuple aim. And so Da Vinci 5 is that found.
Every other company out there, they must have, this is going to become table stakes. I don't know if they'll ever monetize this as intuitive. Maybe they have a freemium version, which is you get an amount free, and then if you want premium or certain data sets, because it is expensive to do this as a company. But all companies must have some kind of data hub, some kind of data, because that is going to be table stakes. And if you don't have it, it's going to be a major problem for you in tenders, in GPO contracts. It's going to be, just from a user point of view, if you're used to having all this great Strava-like data and suddenly you switch robots and you don't have any of it. And this again, where I think the genius is going to be of the fleet, and the fleet uses the same Strava-like system across the fleet, and it's going to be a closed system. And if you want to have your robotic data and laparoscopic manual data, use a Da Vinci 5 tower, and it can all be on this hub. It's going to be hard to break that for competition.
Foundational platform that will bring aspects of our AI, ML, digital world to life and impact surgery.
Thanks so much, Dave.
Thank you. And our next question comes from the line of Patrick Wood from Morgan Stanley. Your question, please.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. I'll keep it to one in the interest of time. I'd love to do more on the alternative side of care side of things. And I know you guys have talked in the past about, XIs going into the ASC. I guess my question is, how much do you think?
Why is everyone so keyed up on about the ASCs? Because if you look at it, there's a transition of a lot of cases being pushed by hospitals that now own ASCs to push them to that site of care, because it's got less resourcing. It should potentially make slightly more profit, but I sometimes wonder about that. But it's about getting them out of the main hospital, freeing up the hospital, and allowing these lower acuity or the right cases to be done over in the ASC. And if the politics moves all the cases over there and you can't use them on the robot, do you lose cases? So I think that's why everyone keeps asking about this.
The original capital cost is a constraint versus, Medicare coverage and commercial rates relative to, INA instrumentation costs. And then there's also like that sterilization challenge in there. So I guess the crux of the question is, how much do you guys think you need to continue to bend the cost curve down for I&A to make it work in the ASC? And do you feel like the sterilization challenge is small enough that it kind of doesn't really matter and you don't need to develop like disposable instrumentation or something like that? Thanks.
Yeah, I would just say maybe our experience so far in the US is by some way the greater constraint is on the capital side. A number of the systems we have in ASCs have been leased. The majority of systems in US ASCs are XI, but we do have a number of X's just obviously because of the low.
So again, just to be clear on this, they're saying here that the capital, but everything's going over to lease. So your cheap robot or your cheaper robot is not going to help you at that point. If they put all of their systems in these pre-owned, pre-loved XIs into the ASCs under a leasing deal, I think it's more of the size of the capital that's the problem. And I've just done a post recently about, I imagine that Intuitive does have an ASC robot ready to go in there somewhere, which is smaller, cheaper, lighter, easier to be in an ASC. It's not just about the cost in the ASC. There's a lot of things in the ASC that you can look in my blog that you need to dig into. I think it was a video that I did. Yeah, look on this channel. Oh, by the way, do subscribe to this channel because I have a lot of these things, and like the video now, please. Thank you.
Lower price point. While it's a relatively small installed base, procedure growth in ASCs in the US is quite a bit accretive to what we see in terms of overall US procedure growth. I think that with XIR, ASCs are going to be an area of increased interest and focus for us, and obviously we're going to look carefully at
XIR, notice the acronym, so I guess that's XI refurbished.
Yeah, the economics. It's fair to say that as we stand today, the reimbursement in an ASC is a fraction of the reimbursement in a HOPD, and so that creates a barrier, particularly for ASCs owned by IDNs. Have not had a lot of pushback on I&A prices at this point in ASCs, but I think from a strategic perspective, within the quintuple aim, we look to lower total cost to treat, and I think therefore it's a topic of strategic interest to us.
So I take that as what I said in my other video, which is they have to look at a way. I think they can scrape the surface of the ASCs with the current XIR and the instruments and accessories being at $1,800 average, but that's not going to cover most of the procedures. It's not going to cover most of the ASCs. He mentions HOPD, which is a hospital outpatient department, and yes, they can do better because they get different pricing over there. I think that their answer is to get a system specific, and it was interesting that they asked, disposable. Could be part of the answer is to have disposable, because that fixes two things. If you can get the cost down enough, and it stops the sterilization need, because ASCs have problems with sterilization departments and turnover and things like that. So all to be pulled out, and I'll pull that out in some more blogs lately. But this is a very important strategic area for Intuitive to resolve, and I'm not sure they've resolved it today. And I think they're going to have a different program, different robot, different instruments, I&A, to make this work in the future.
It is, and to your last kind of part of your question around sterilization and I&A, my experience in the ASCs that I visited and talking with our teams is that sterilization hasn't been an impediment to the overall program and the consideration of placing a robotic system there. And so I don't believe that.
Going to debate with that. I think it is. I think in the big ASCs and the ones where the XIs are today, I think it's probably less of a problem. As you go out to a broader group of ASCs, it becomes a bigger problem. And I think the problem also as well is to do with volume. So when it's a low volume, it's fine because you can use whatever you want, send it off to a central sterilization place somewhere out away from the ASC, and then wait for it to come back. So you do 1-2 cases a day, that's fine. If you wanted to do 8 cases a day, I do absolutely firmly believe it will be a problem, and it'll be something they will have to resolve. But that's just my opinion. Sorry to disagree.
Single-use I&A is a requirement to go into the ASC environment.
Super clear. Thanks for taking the question, guys.
Which maybe says to me that they are not quite thinking of disposables at the minute, and I understand why. I know how hard it is to do a disposable at the right price that is going to be acceptable and be able to work at the precision that they have. It's not as easy as you think.
Thank you. And our next question comes from the line of David Roman from Goldman Sachs. Your question, please.
Good afternoon, and thank you for taking the question. I had one on haptics and a follow-up on Ion/SP. Maybe starting on the haptics and force feedback side. I think a little over a year ago when you launched DV5, you got the question on an earnings call. What are the specific procedure categories where you see DV5 most applicable? And I think your response was something to the effect of DV5 is about making robotic surgery ubiquitous. Today you're talking about, I think, expansion of procedures into benign general surgery, and I don't know if that's a reflection of that strategy of making robotic surgery ubiquitous, but maybe you sort of talk to how you're seeing that unfold and where force feedback fits into that trajectory.
So what everyone's always trying to understand is how you go from the current pool of procedures today and how do you expand into the other ones without new regulatory or a whole new system. Today they have a target of procedures and there's an expanded pool up to about 22 million that they could go after. And the question always comes around of what are the things that you add on with, say, a DV5 that allow immediate access or right to play in those other areas, or why people would bring those procedures in. So that's what they're trying to understand.
Sure. Let me start with the force feedback side. So you heard from Dan a little bit about the journey of force feedback and what it's going to take. Starting with instruments that are robust enough to be used on a daily basis and getting sterilized and getting to scale for our customers. And we're well on our way there. And then what we've seen is...
By the way, that's just because lifetime uses on the force feedback instruments are different than the lifetime uses on some of their standard instruments. Just because you've got to make sure that you keep the precision for the force feedback to work. It's not easy.
There's data, and Dan did talk about this, data that shows that through the use of force feedback, you can see lower forces in surgery. And so now we have to connect that to outcomes and see whether or not that lower force is actually leading to either improved outcomes or speeding up of learning.
Now, what I love about Intuitive on this is there's not the arrogance there. There's not the automatic, well, we've brought this technology and it's got lower force, so of course it's going to be better outcomes. They've got the humility to say, we have an assumption that we think it's going to be better, and the logic says if you have less force, you're going to have better outcomes. But we better prove it because we have to make sure we're in line with our customers to prove it. And I do love that about Intuitive.
And so that is where we are today. We've seen some early data that shows, it's very interesting and I think very aligned to the hypothesis of force feedback, which says if we can actually apply lower forces, we do expect that to have an improvement on outcomes. And so that has to happen procedure by procedure, because as you look inside of each procedure, it's likely that those forces will impact outcomes in a different way. For example, with prostatectomy, you might be looking at functional outcomes as a result of how much force is applied to nerves. If you're in nephrectomies or other colorectal procedures.
Just to correct him there, because he said nephrectomies and other colorectal. I think he meant colectomies and other colorectal. Sorry if I'm being pedantic there.
You might be looking at recovery of bowel function as a result of how much force is applied to the bowel during those procedures. And so each one of those will happen in varying ways. And I think as that evidence emerges, that's the catalyst. That's the catalyst to broader adoption and how you see now force feedback.
So why do you need the evidence? Because the force feedback instruments and the architecture, you need a DV5 for number one, which costs more, and you need the force feedback instruments, which are about an 18 or 20% price premium. So you've got to be able to show that when you add extra cost, you give extra benefit. And what they could probably show in this on longer term data is that if you use force feedback instruments, you get much better outcomes and therefore total cost savings. Patients go home easier. There's less injuries. There's less complications over the whole patient population. And that therefore would drive the use of the force feedback instruments, but it's all going to be based upon requiring data, and they have the patience to do it.
The impact aspects of the quintuple aim at scale. And so that just goes to, I think, the overall thesis of robotic-assisted surgery improving aspects of the quintuple aim. We've seen that throughout our history, and now with the addition of force feedback, that's just one more piece of the puzzle here.
That's very helpful. And then maybe quickly, just I'll follow up on Ion and SP. I think you talked about a little over 50% procedure growth in Ion, and I think I heard 91% in SP. You've had a number of SP clearances.
I don't go too deep into
Thank you. And our next question comes from the line of Adam Meter from Piper Sandler. Your question, please.
Hi, good afternoon. Congrats on the quarter, and thank you for squeezing me in here. I will keep it to one. I wanted to ask about the DV5 OUS launch in Europe and Japan, and was wondering if you could share just a little bit more kind of early feedback that you've gathered to date, help us better understand the rollout strategy there, and any broad color around the pace of DV5 placements outside the U.S. in subsequent quarters.
This is a question, again, I'm probably making this up here, but a lot of people want to understand OUS for DV5 because it's seen as such a premium product, and all the other companies out there that are going non-US who are trying to go after it are on sort of back on the XI sort of thing. So I think people are trying to understand is the DV5 going to be accepted at the price points, at the premium upgrade, and is it going to be a technology that people want? That's my think of it.
In 2026 would be much appreciated. Thank you for taking the question.
Yeah, I just say it's relatively early. We take a local approach to each of those launches. Obviously, we have a pipeline in Europe and in Japan. You see the larger institutions and those institutions that want to be early adopters and want to get hold of the latest technology to be those that are most interested. There is a little bit more of a segmentation discussion in terms of some incremental cost sensitivity to the da Vinci 5 pricing relative to, say, the US market. I think we have a healthy pipeline in both markets, but there's work to be done to have customers work through the evaluation process.
I don't expect it to be anywhere near as successful as in the US and near as fast as a ramp up as in the US, just because of the way that whole tenders work and everything. There's also proof, and they want to prove it, and it's not about marketing so much. Say in Europe as it is maybe in the US, that we've got the latest and greatest come to us. It doesn't kind of work that way in socialized medicine. So I think it's going to be slower and more concentrated. But I do think that if the proof shows out that the DV5 is better and gives better workflow and efficiency and things like that, I think that the justified cost will be there. But ultimately, I think a lot of people will be happy with the XIs, and the refurbed XIs will be another, you'll see that as a good blip in the OUS market. I think Japan, it's going to be, will the DV5 be more attractive than a Medicoroid?
Okay, that was our last question. Thank you for all the interesting questions. In closing, we continue to believe.
Okay, I stopped it there. You can go and listen to that last 20 seconds if you want. But basically, let me come out of the scene. Oh, there we go. So I'm sorry that's been so long. It's about 1 hour 30. I want to make this a 1 hour 30 video. In conclusion, for me, very, very healthy business. They are still the leader by a long way. The DV5 is on a roll. I think US has seen a lot of upgrades. The XI refurbishment, do not underestimate that and how that's going to make it difficult for everybody. The pricing, we're down at the 1.6 area, and I think that's going to be about the level of it, with XIR coming in at, I guess, 600 to 900 would be a fair price on that. It's all about instrumentation and getting the INA used. Yeah, it's going to be about getting the razor blades used. Don't focus on the installs as we go forward. Over 10,000 and 900 of those in the da Vinci 5, very impressive. And the forward-looking way of going into things like nipple sparing mastectomy is going to be one of the interesting things, but also then the cardiac. Clearly, it's the next platforms that are coming based off Ion, based off SP, that all these things are starting to come together in my mind towards these flexible systems that are going to go in, and they're going to do cardiac, and I just think it's in great shape. So I hope that's been useful. That's just my technical, doesn't mean anything from anything, and you certainly don't want to be thinking about it as an investor on what I talk about, because it's mostly what I talk about is nonsense. It's just my opinion, but I hope that's been useful, and if it has, I do want you to subscribe to the channel, because I'm going to do more of this kind of stuff, and I want you to please like the video, because that massively helps me, hugely helps me, and I will catch you for the next one.